The morning she saw him again, Norah was elbow-deep in espresso grounds and someone else's crying baby. And the last thing she expected was for the past to walk through her front door wearing a gray suit and a face she'd spent 6 years trying to forget. It was a Tuesday. It's always something ordinary like that when your life comes apart. Not a dramatic Friday night, not a thunderstorm, not even a full moon. Just a Tuesday in October when the fog off the bay hadn't burned off yet, and the line at Grounds and Grace stretched out the door and onto Clement Street because it always did on cold mornings, and Norah had learned to love that about her little corner of San Francisco. She'd built this place from nothing. 2 years after moving back to the city with a newborn and $43 in her checking account and a mother who said, "I told you so," without ever saying anything at all, Norah had opened this cafe. 6 tables, a second-hand espresso machine that cost her 2 months of savings and a prayer. Mismatched chairs because she couldn't afford matching ones. She'd painted the walls herself, pale green and cream, while her daughter slept in a Moses basket on the counter. That was 5 years ago. Now the place had a Yelp rating of 4.8, a regular crowd of retirees and remote workers and neighborhood families, and a 6-year-old named Lily who still occasionally showed up after school and sat on the counter doing homework because Norah's babysitter lived 2 blocks away, and sometimes the timing was tight. That was her life. Small hers, held together with calluses and routine, and the particular kind of fierce that grows in women who've had no choice but to figure it out alone. She was pulling a double shot when the bell above the door rang at 8:14 in the morning, and her barista, a 22-year-old named Petra, whose entire personality was oat milk and true crime podcasts, said quietly behind her, "Norah, there's a man at the door, and he's kind of stopping everyone." Norah didn't look up. She had 3 drinks to finish and a pastry order to recount, and she did not have time for men who stopped everyone. "Tell him to get in line," she said. "He's not getting in line," Petra said. "He's just standing there, and he's looking at you." Norah looked up, and the double shot she was pulling overflowed. She didn't notice. Hot espresso ran over the portafilter and across the counter and dripped onto the rubber mat at her feet, and she stood completely still because the man in the doorway was Damian Voss. And Damian Voss had no business being in her cafe on Clement Street on a Tuesday morning in October, because Damian Voss was supposed to be in another life entirely, the one she'd left, the one she'd survived, the one that had left her first. His hair was shorter than she remembered. There were lines at the corners of his eyes she didn't recognize. He was dressed differently than he used to be, less edge, more architecture, the kind of suit that cost more than her espresso machine, but wore like he'd forgotten he had it on. He looked older. He looked like time had passed for him too. He looked exactly like the man she'd once loved enough to burn her whole life down for. And then his eyes found hers across a crowded cafe, and every single thing she'd built in the last 6 years went very, very quiet. Norah had been 28 when she met him. She was doing contract work as a nutritionist for a downtown private wellness clinic, the kind of place that charged $400 for an initial consultation and catered to people who could afford to pay someone to care about their health. She'd taken the job because it paid well, and she needed well, and she'd been good at it because she actually cared, which apparently was rare enough to be remarkable. Damian Voss had been referred by a business partner. He came in on a Wednesday, filled out the intake form in handwriting that looked almost deliberately illegible, and sat across from her in the consultation room with the particular stillness of a man who was used to rooms arranging themselves around him. He was 34. He ran a private security and logistics firm that did work Norah didn't entirely understand and had learned not to ask too specifically about. He was not friendly exactly, but he was present, fully, uncomfortably present in a way most people weren't. Like he actually listened when she spoke. Like he actually saw her. She told herself it was nothing. She told herself that 6 months later, when they were 3 dates in, and she was still telling herself it was nothing. She told herself it right up until the night she stopped telling herself anything and just let herself fall. For 2 years, she loved him. Not easily. Loving Damian Voss was never easy. He kept parts of himself behind glass, visible, inaccessible. There were phone calls he took in other rooms. There were nights he disappeared for days and came back quieter than he'd left, with bruising she knew better than to ask about. There were things she could feel pressing against the edges of what they were, things he wouldn't name, and she'd made peace with the pressure because the rest of it was real. The rest of it was the most real thing she'd ever had. And then she got pregnant. She'd told him on a Sunday. She'd planned what she was going to say for 3 days, and then said none of it, just handed him the test and watched his face and tried to read what was behind his eyes. He was quiet for a long time, and then he said, "I can't do this with you. Not we. Not us, I." She asked him what that meant. He said there were things about his life he hadn't been honest about. Things that made having a family impossible. He said he was sorry. He said it more than once, like repetition might make it land differently. He said he would make sure she was financially taken care of. She told him what he could do with his financial support. He left that Sunday and didn't come back. She'd spent 2 weeks being furious and 1 week being devastated, and then she'd looked at herself in the mirror with a 5-week pregnancy and $43 and decided she didn't have time for either. She went home to San Francisco. She had her daughter. She built her cafe. She made herself a life. She did not think about Damian Voss, except on the nights when she did, except when Lily laughed and her eyes crinkled exactly the way his did, except when she caught herself wondering whether he'd ever thought about it, whether he'd ever regretted the way he'd held her whole life in his hands and then set it down so carefully, like he was being kind. He wasn't in line. He was still standing in the doorway with the fog behind him and the morning light doing something complicated to the gray at his temples, and every customer in Grounds and Grace had clocked him and gone back to their laptops and their conversations. But not fully, not really, because Damian Voss was the kind of man you didn't stop noticing. Norah turned off the espresso machine. She came out from behind the counter. She was wearing her work clothes, dark jeans, a Henley, a canvas apron, and she had coffee on her forearm and flour on her elbow from the morning pastry order, and she had absolutely no intention of pretending she was something other than what she was. "This isn't a coincidence," she said. "You don't do coincidences." "No," he said, "I don't." "Then why are you here?" Something crossed his face, complicated and careful and 6 years old. "Because I need to explain some things, and because I heard about your daughter." The bottom dropped out of her stomach. She had not told him. She had never told him. She'd made that decision in a San Francisco apartment at 2 in the morning when she was still raw from everything, and she had kept it for 6 years. And the only people who knew were her mother and Angela, her best friend, and the pediatrician, and none of them would have told him. "How?" she said. It came out flat, not a question, almost a threat, a mutual contact. He was watching her carefully. "I wasn't looking. I need you to know that. I wasn't having anyone track you." A name came up in a context I can't get into, and there was a photograph, and she has... He stopped. "She has my eyes." Norah's jaw tightened. Behind her, she could feel Petra very carefully not listening. "You need to leave," Norah said quietly. "Norah, you are standing in my place of business, and my daughter gets off school at 3, and you need to leave before I make a decision about this that I can't unmake." He left, but he left his card on the counter near the door, which she noticed because of course she did, and she left it there all day. And by the time she was closing up at 7, it had gotten coffee rings on it from someone setting down their cup, and she picked it up and put it in her pocket anyway. She didn't call him that night. She sat with Lily through dinner and bath time and 2 chapters of a dragon book her daughter was obsessed with. And after Lily was asleep, Norah sat on the kitchen floor with her back against the cabinet and held her own elbows and tried to decide if the last 6 years had been leading to this or running from it. She called Angela instead. Angela, who knew everything, who had been there when Lily was born and when the cafe first opened, and when Norah's mother said things that required a friend present to survive. "He found out," Norah said. Angela was quiet for 3 full seconds. "How?" He said, "A mutual contact. A photograph. What do you want to do?" That was the thing about Angela. She didn't tell Norah what to do. She just asked what Norah wanted and trusted that she'd figure it out, which was the most terrifying and most loving thing anyone could do for a person. "I don't know," Norah said honestly. Yes, you do, Angela said. You've known what you were going to do since the second you saw him. Norah closed her eyes. She hated that Angela was right. She called him the next morning. He answered on the first ring, which told her he'd been waiting. They met at a coffee shop 3 blocks from her cafe, which she'd chosen deliberately, neutral territory, but hers, so she had the geography. He was already there when she arrived. He stood when she walked in, which was such a specific, old-fashioned thing that it caught her off guard. They sat. She ordered nothing. He had water and had barely touched it. Talk, she said. So he did. He told her things he'd never told her when they were together. About the firm. About what it actually did. Private security contracts with a shadow side she'd always suspected but never confirmed. Logistics work that crossed lines in places where the law was a suggestion and the alternative was worse. He told her about his father, who'd built the business from something darker than private security, who'd used Damian to launder respectability over something that didn't deserve it. He told her about the moment, 2 months before she told him about the pregnancy, when he'd realized he was in too deep to get out cleanly, that he'd looked at the people around him who'd tried to walk away and seen what happened. I thought leaving you was protecting you, he said. I know how that sounds. It sounds like you made a decision about my life without asking me. Yes, he didn't flinch from it. It does, and I was wrong. She looked at him across the table. Did you think about her before you knew? The question landed. She watched it land. I thought about you, he said quietly. I didn't know about her, but I thought about you more than I ever let myself admit. And the fact that there's a child, he stopped, pressed his thumb to the corner of his eye for a second. I'm not here to ask you for anything. I want to be clear about that. I'm not here to disrupt what you've built. I needed you to know that I know, and that whatever you decide, I'll respect it. Norah looked at her hands on the table. She'd spent 6 years being angry at this man, and the anger was real, and it was earned, and she wasn't going to pretend otherwise. But sitting across from him in a coffee shop with morning light coming through the window and 6 years of absence between them, she also couldn't pretend that the man she'd loved hadn't been real, that the reasons had been nothing. She wasn't going to forgive him today. She wasn't even sure forgiveness was the right word for what the next step was. But her daughter had his eyes, and her daughter deserved to know one day where those eyes came from. I'm not telling Lily yet, she said. Not until I understand what this looks like. Not until I know what you're actually offering. I'm not offering anything, he said. I'm asking permission to earn it. She didn't answer that. She picked up her bag and stood up and said, I'll call you, and walked out. And for the first time in 6 years, she didn't spend the rest of the day feeling like she was walking away from something. This time she felt like she was walking toward it, or something like it. She wasn't sure yet. What happened next, she didn't see coming. She'd given herself the week to think, to watch, to let the information settle. And then on Thursday afternoon, 40 minutes before she needed to pick up Lily from aftercare, a woman came into Grounds and Grace. Professionally dressed, mid-40s, the kind of compose that takes practice. She sat at the counter and ordered a latte, and while Petra was making it, she slid a card across the counter to Norah. Just a card. No name. Just an address in the financial district and a time. Someone would like to speak with you, the woman said. About Damian Voss. Norah's hands went very still. Who? She asked. Someone who knows things about him that you should probably know before you decide to let him back into your life. The woman paused. Or your daughters. The latte came. The woman paid, left a 20, and walked out. Norah stood holding the card and thought about every alarm her body had just set off simultaneously. She called Damian. He picked up immediately. She read him the address. The silence on his end was 3 seconds too long. Don't go, he said. And the way he said it wasn't controlling. It was afraid. And she'd known this man for years, and she had never, not once, heard him afraid. Who is it? She asked. It's my father's people, he said, or people who used to work for him. Norah, listen to me. I need you to pick up Lily right now, and take her somewhere that isn't your apartment. Angela's place. Your mother's. Anywhere. I'll explain everything. But please, don't tell me to please, she said. because the fear in his voice was doing something to her own, and she needed to stay level. Tell me what's happening. I've been trying to dismantle what my father left behind for 2 years. There are people who don't want that to happen. They know I came to you, and they'll use whatever is closest to me. She was already untying her apron. I'm getting my daughter, she said. I know. I'm already on my way. She didn't wait for him. She handed Petra the keys, said something about a family emergency, and drove 6 blocks to Lily's school with her hands tight on the wheel and her brain running the same sentence on a loop. She's fine. She's fine. She's in aftercare and she's fine. She was. Lily was sitting at a low table with 4 other kids doing a puzzle, wearing 1 purple sock and 1 polka dot sock because she'd been dressing herself for 8 months and did not take suggestions. And when she saw Norah, her whole face opened up like a window. Mama, can I finish my corner? In the car, Norah said. Come on, baby. She got Lily buckled and drove to Angela's without explaining anything because Lily was 6 and didn't need the specifics, just the presence. Angela met them at the door, took one look at Norah's face, and said, Kitchen, I'll make tea. Lily, your movies are on the tablet. Lily was already headed for the couch. Angela made tea. Norah told her everything. Angela didn't say I told you so, because she wasn't that kind of friend, but she also didn't look surprised, because she'd never been the kind of friend who was surprised when Norah's life got complicated. What do you want to do? Angela asked. I want to know what he's actually dealing with, Norah said, and then I want to decide. Damian arrived at Angela's apartment 40 minutes later. He knocked, not rang the bell, knocked, like he understood that a doorbell would be too much noise for the current state of things. Norah stepped outside with him. The hallway of Angela's building was beige and fluorescent, and the least dramatic setting possible for the conversation that followed. He told her everything. His father had built the firm on contracts that had included some things that were legal and some that weren't. And Damian had inherited the whole structure at 31 when his father had a stroke, and he'd spent 3 years trying to unwrap it without destroying the people who'd built legitimate lives within it. The people who'd sent the woman to the cafe were his father's former partners who'd been cut off from revenue streams Damian had shut down. They'd been watching. They'd seen him visit the cafe. They don't know about Lily, he said. Not yet. I don't think. But if they're moving, I need to move faster. What does moving faster mean? It means there's a meeting I've been postponing with a federal contact. Someone who can give me immunity in exchange for everything I know about my father's operation. I've been holding it because I wasn't sure I was ready. He looked at her steadily. I'm ready. She studied his face, looking for the glass he used to keep between himself and everything real. It wasn't there. It had been there for the 2 years they'd been together, that careful distance, and it wasn't there now. And if you do that, she said slowly, what does that mean for you? It means I testify. It means some of my father's people go to prison. It means I lose the firm, probably. But I come out clean. And us? The word surprised her when it came out. She hadn't planned to say us. But Damian didn't look surprised. He looked like he'd been waiting for that exact word for 6 years. That's up to you, he said quietly. It has always been up to you. I just wanted to make sure that if you chose anything, you chose it knowing the full truth. Not the version I gave you 2 years in when I was still pretending I could protect you by keeping you in the dark. Norah leaned against the wall of Angela's hallway and looked at the beige paint and thought about the last 6 years, the cafe, Lily's laugh, the purple and polka dot socks, the $43, the espresso machine that still made a sound like a dying pigeon on cold mornings. Everything she'd built because she'd had no other choice, and she thought about how she'd built all of it, and she was proud of it, and it was hers, and she didn't need him to complete it. But maybe wanting something and needing it weren't the same thing. Make the call, she said finally. Do what you need to do, and then we'll talk. He made the call the next day. It took 6 weeks after that. 6 weeks of federal meetings she wasn't part of and couldn't ask about. 6 weeks of Lily going to school and Norah opening the cafe and Petra making oat milk drinks and the world continuing to be ordinary around the edges of something enormous happening in the middle. Damian texted every few days, not asking for anything, just still in it, just Thinking about you both. Just, one day, a photograph of a coffee cup from a mediocre diner somewhere she didn't recognize with the text, "Yours is better." She'd laughed, out loud, alone in her kitchen at 7 in the morning, which felt like something. When it was over, when the immunity deal was signed and the testimony given and the last legal thread of his father's operation had been severed, Damian called her on a Thursday evening. She'd just gotten Lily down. She was sitting on the kitchen floor again, which was apparently where she processed things now. "It's done," he said. "Are you safe?" Yes. She let out a breath she'd been holding for 6 weeks. A pause. "Can I see you? Not to ask for anything. I want to see you." She thought about it. Actually thought about it, not just felt it. "Come to the cafe," she said. "Saturday, 7 a.m. Before we open." He came at 6:58. She had coffee ready, the real kind, pulled properly, not overflowed. She slid a cup across the counter, and he sat on one of her mismatched stools and looked around the cafe like he was trying to memorize it. "You built this," he said. "I did. It looks like you." He picked up the cup. Warm and precise and better than it has to be. She sat down across the counter from him. "Lily thinks her dad was someone who died," she said. "That's what I told her when she was 4 and started asking. I'm not proud of it, but I wasn't ready to explain the truth to a 4-year-old. He was very still. "I need you to understand that telling her is not something I'll do quickly or carelessly," she said. "When we do it, if we do it, it has to be the right time and the right words, and she has to be able to trust what we tell her. That means I have to trust you first." "I know," he said, "and trusting you is not the same as forgiving you. I'm still working on the forgiving. I know that too." She looked at him across the counter of the place she'd built from $43 and a prayer. "But I'm working on it," she said. "That's what I can offer you right now." He nodded. He didn't push. He drank his coffee, which she could tell by his face was genuinely the best he'd had in a long time, and she appreciated that he didn't say it out loud and cheapen it. They talked for 2 hours before the cafe opened. About nothing important, the diner with the bad coffee, the federal contact, who apparently had strong opinions about breakfast sandwiches, Lily's current Dragon Book obsession. Easy things. Small things. The kind of things you talk about when you're learning how to be in the same room as someone again. When Petra arrived at 8:45 and clocked them, she gave Norah a look that contained an entire novel. Norah gave her a look back that said later, and meant it. 3 weeks after that, Norah told Lily that her dad was alive. She did it on a Sunday afternoon, with Angela waiting in the next room and a mug of tea cooling on the coffee table, and Lily sitting cross-legged on the couch in her dragon pajamas. She kept it simple. She said that she and Lily's dad had been separated for a long time, and that some things had been complicated, but that he was a good person and that he very much wanted to know her. Lily was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Does he like dragons?" Norah blinked. "I don't know. We could ask him." "Okay," Lily said, and then she got up and went back to her book. 6-year-olds, Norah had learned, were not always the dramatic audience you anticipated. They met in the park the following Saturday. Damian arrived with no agenda, which she appreciated. He sat on the bench beside Norah while Lily examined the nearby duck pond with forensic focus. After 10 minutes, Lily walked over, looked at him with the direct, assessing gaze that she'd had since she was about 2 years old, and said, "Are you my dad?" He swallowed. "Yes," he said. "I am." She thought about this. "Do you like dragons?" His voice came out a little rough. "I don't know much about them. I'd like to learn." Lily looked at Norah, then back at him. Then she held out her hand in the extremely formal way she'd recently developed for greeting adults she didn't know yet. He shook it, and something in Norah's chest, something she hadn't even known, was still held tight, loosened. They didn't rush it. They took it in Saturdays. Park trips. One bookstore visit where Lily showed him the complete dragon saga she was working through. One afternoon where he came to the cafe and helped stack pastry boxes because Norah's supplier had delivered late and she was behind. He was terrible at stacking pastry boxes, and Lily laughed so hard at him that she had to sit down. Norah watched them, thought, this is how it starts. Not grand gestures, not declarations. Just showing up and being useful and making a 6-year-old laugh until she sits down. 9 months later, on a Tuesday morning, It was always a Tuesday. Damian came into the cafe before it opened and set a small box on the counter. Norah looked at it. She looked at him. "I'm not proposing," he said quickly. "I know where we are, and I'm not jumping it. It's not a ring." She opened the box. It was a key, just a key. "I bought a place," he said. 6 blocks from here. Nothing complicated, just I wanted you to know that I'm not going anywhere, and I wanted it to be your choice whether that door is ever open to you." He paused. "Or to Lily." Norah held the key in her palm. 6 years ago, she'd stood in her kitchen with $43 and a pregnancy test, and the specific fury of someone who'd been left when they needed to be stayed with. She'd built something from that fury, a business, a life. A daughter who shook hands with strangers and asked about dragons and wore mismatched socks without apology. She was proud of every single piece of it, and she was also, she'd finally let herself admit, ready for the next piece. 6 blocks, she said. 6 blocks! That's close enough to borrow coffee. He almost smiled. That was the idea. She closed her fingers around the key. It wasn't a fairy tale. She knew that. The next years would have hard days. There would be mornings when Lily asked questions that didn't have easy answers. There would be moments when old wounds ached the way healed ones do. When the weather changes, there would be things to navigate that neither of them had a map for. But Norah had learned something in the last 6 years, standing behind her counter, pulling espresso, and running the numbers and raising her daughter and becoming, one small hard day at a time, exactly who she needed to be. You don't need saving. You don't need completing. What you need, sometimes, the rare and terrifying thing, is someone who shows up knowing all of that and chooses you anyway. Chooses the cafe and the mismatched chairs and the $43 origin story and the daughter who demands dragon credentials from every new adult in her orbit. Chooses the whole complicated, self-made, fiercely tended life and asks for nothing but to be allowed to stand inside it. That, Norah had decided, was worth a second chance, and some people, she'd learned slowly, reluctantly, honestly, were worth fighting for even after you'd survived them. She put the key on her keychain that night next to the cafe key and the key to Angela's place. 3 keys, everything she needed. The rest, she figured, she'd build as she went. She always had.